we have done yesterday? Okay, so you had to do those steps in details, which were actually skipped. I didn't do the detailed derivations, and I had left it to you. So I hope every one of you have been able to do that. Now, yesterday we were talking about, okay, what is the meaning of this u equals v and u equals minus v? So one case represents the longitudinal component, and other one represents actually the transverse or shear component. So we will be seeing this diagrammatically here. So the same thing, I mean, let us assume that this is representing top view of the cubic unit cell. We are talking of simple cubic crystal, right? Or cubic crystal in general, not only simple cubic. So this is representing z-axis view. So if you view a simple cubic unit cell from top or from z-axis, it would look like a square of this kind. And here, this direction is representing 110 direction, because if you see, this is y-axis, this is x-axis, z-axis is perpendicular to the screen, then this is representing 110 direction. I'm sure you all are comfortable with these directions, so don't need to go much into that. But okay, now we have to visualize how this represents u, how u equals v represents 110, or a wave propagating or particles oscillating along 110 direction. Wave has to propagate along this direction, right? 110. This is what we are studying. And at the same time, we are saying that is, which one is the longitudinal wave? The one for which u equals v. So as we know that u represents the displacement along x direction and v represents the displacement along y direction. So we are saying the component of displacement along x direction is same as the component of displacement along y direction. So that if particle is here, and if you change u by something like say delta u, then v will change by same amount. Means where will the particle move to? So particle, if it was initially here, it will move to this point somewhere like this, along this line, because this is the line representing u equals v. So this is, so the oscillation of particles under the condition u equals to v represents the oscillations on this line, which is nothing but the longitudinal waves, because direction of propagation is the same line and particles are oscillating along the same line. So this is representing longitudinal waves. I hope this is clear to you. Similarly, other case was for u equals minus v. So again, x-axis, y-axis are like this, the same situation. So okay, this is your okay. So this is your 110 direction as usual. So now what is u equals minus v? So now or v is equal to minus u, you can say both ways. So suppose u is positive. Okay, I mean in this case u is minus v. So v, so y direction is downwards. So what we mean here is that okay, I mean v is positive when the particle is moving downwards, something like this. So don't get confused. Conventionally, we represent y-axis upwards and positive component of y along upward direction. So here it is changed. So don't confuse yourself. So this is v. I mean positive v is along this direction. So this one is representing positive component of v, and u is, suppose this is origin, so this is opposite to this one. So u is minus v. So this direction is representing u is equal to minus v. So what is the direction of propagation of direction of oscillation of particles or the mass? Particles will be oscillating along this line. And where is the wave propagating? It is propagating along 110 direction, because we began with the conditions which were considering the wave vector or wave function having direction of propagation along 110 direction, that we have done yesterday. And this is exactly perpendicular to this one. So this oscillations actually represents shear or transverse waves propagating along 110 direction in a cube. But and remember that we had done one more case yesterday where shear waves were considered for the same 110 direction. But in that case, the oscillation of the particles of the medium were along z direction, right? So this is your xy plane. So particles for transverse waves can oscillate either this way, perpendicular to 110 direction, or perpendicular to the plane of the screen, or we can say along the z direction. So in case the particles are oscillating along a z direction, the relationship between omega and k was given by this expression. This we have done yesterday, so I don't need to get into that in detail today. But yes, what is interesting here is that velocity indeed will be equal to under root of C44 by rho. So this is one shear wave. And for second case, I mean this case, we have derived yesterday that the relation between omega and k is given by this. So for this component, u equals minus v, omega square and k square are related by this. So for propagation of waves along 110 direction, the two transverse components are not degenerate. The velocity for this case, when particles are oscillating along z direction, is different and depends on C44 only. Whereas velocity for the particles, whereas velocity of propagation of the waves, not velocity of the particles. So velocity of propagation of the waves in this case is given by C44 by rho under the root. And in this case, this is also a transverse wave, but the oscillation of the particle now is in xy plane. So in that case, the velocity is given by this expression. So now in this case, velocity depends upon C11 and C12. So this is something interesting and you should note this carefully. Here, this figure summarizes the three cases, rather one more additional case which we have not discussed as such. But okay, wave propagations in 111 direction. So okay, let us first talk about 100 direction. So you have one longitudinal propagation mode. So 100 direction means this is the, suppose these are representing x, y, and z axis for cube, or ABC lattice vectors, you can say. Then the wave propagating along any one of the edges of the cube represents, I mean, in this case, the particles are oscillating along the same edge, and the wave is also propagating along same direction. Particles are oscillating along same direction as that of k. So that is called longitudinal mode. So for longitudinal mode, the velocity is related to C11. I mean, velocity is under root of C11 over rho. So this is representing that, okay, longitudinal mode has dependence of velocity on C11 only. Similarly, there will be two transverse modes which will be perpendicular to this. I mean, the propagation direction of the wave is this direction, 100, but the oscillation of the particles is either possible along this way or possible along this way. In both cases, for 100 direction, the velocity was dependent only on C44. That was under root of C44 by rho. We have discussed it. So these, I mean, whenever waves are propagating in cubic crystal along 100 direction, two transverse modes are degenerate to each other. They have exactly same characteristics. This is the case which we discussed just now, and part of it was discussed yesterday. And there we derived that, okay, for longitudinal mode, the velocity was proportional to this. If you would like to see, we may go back to the previous slide. Yes. So this was longitudinal mode. I think this is your transverse mode. Here is your longitudinal mode. And omega square is depending upon C44. This is transverse. Okay. This is your longitudinal mode. And the velocity for longitudinal mode follows from this u equals v. Okay, so velocity follows from this one. I mean, this, when we solve these linear equations which we have done yesterday, so velocity will follow from this one, means omega square upon k square, or omega upon k, will be proportional to half C11 plus C12 plus 2 C44. That's what we have written there. So longitudinal wave, or in longitudinal mode, this is given by this one, right? So this is what is the meaning of this expression here. And the transverse modes, there are two transverse modes. This is that square now we have been representing. This is representing 1, 0, 0 direction. So this is longitudinal one. Now this is the transverse mode T2, and this is the velocity. I mean, this relates to the velocity upon rho we have to do, of course. And this relates to the velocity T of transverse mode T1. So there are two transverse modes, T1 and T2, and that's how a wave propagates. And the two modes are not exactly degenerate, to have different characteristics. I hope that is clear to you. Now, this case we have not done, but you can try it. Rather, I have planned this as an assignment to you all. So now you have to do the same analysis for 110 component. Rather, I would this assignment is given to all of you. I will be uploading it today. That you will derive the expression for velocity for longitudinal and transverse modes in case of propagation of wave along 110 direction. And there we will, you should be in a position to prove that transverse modes are going to be degenerate in this case. Two transverse modes, and longitudinal mode will be given by this. I would expect Rahul and Sandeep to do this assignment, rather monitor this assignment. All of you will do, but then Sandeep and Rahul will take special interest in this, and I may give some additional task to you regarding this. Anyway, so that's what you are going to get for cubic crystal wave. I mean, wave propagating in cubic crystal along one direction. So that you have to do as an assignment. But interesting thing is that for this case, longitudinal mode will be given by this, and transverse modes, two transverse modes will be degenerate. So it depends upon along which direction the wave is propagating. Then you may have transverse modes degenerate or non-degenerate. It's not a generalized thing. So it depends on which direction we are talking about. Well, so here, this table I have taken from Kittel's book, and is given in detail there. So in this table, you can see what they have done is they have summarized the values of all these crystals are cubic actually. These structures are cubic structures. Tungsten, tantalum, copper, silver, gold, aluminium, and potassium, lead, nickel, palladium. All these crystals, they have summarized the values of C11, C12, C14. Since the structures are cubic, so there will be only three stiffness constants. So one very interesting thing which you should notice is that they have given two values. One is at 0 Kelvin, I mean close to 0 Kelvin. Ideally we can't approach 0 Kelvin, but yes, these are values close to 0 Kelvin, and then other values are at 300 Kelvin. One thing is very interesting which we should notice from this table, that at low temperatures, and one more thing we should pay attention to is that, okay, this C11, in general, C11s are higher in magnitude in comparison to the others. So the diagonal elements, rather the longitudinal, the stiffness constants corresponding to the longitudinal strains are highest. Just like Hooke's law, simplest form. I mean, we are stretching the string, maximum force will be along the direction of the spring. You may stretch the spring in a direction perpendicular to the length of the spring, but in that case, restoring force is going to be relatively weaker. That's what it means physically. So C11s are highest, Well, another trend which we notice is that at low temperatures, these are higher. If you notice these numbers, for every case, you see for tungsten, W means tungsten. This is 5.326. Then at 300 Kelvin, it decreases slightly, 5.233. This is 2.049. It slightly decreases 2.045 at 300 Kelvin. This is 1.631, 1.607. And this trend can be observed for every case. You can see even for lead, this is 0.555, 0.5495, 454, 423, 194, 149. This is general trend. So now, can you think of explaining this? Why is it happening that, okay, at low temperature, these are higher, at high temperature, these are lower? How can we explain this? Or what do you expect, intuitively at least, that how we can explain this decrease in this stiffness constants with temperature? Yes, any one of you? Whatever you expect, whatever is your imagination think or allow you to think. Why can we, or how can we explain this? Are you able to hear me? With increase in temperature, body will be more elastic. There was a very common standard question, Shreya, that steel and rubber, out of two, which one is more elastic? And we used to call steel is more elastic. I hope this was a very standard +2 level question. So at high temperature, how we expect the body to be more elastic? And if the body is more elastic, then that means what should happen in that case? Sandeep?
Sir, when temperature increases, then I think bond strength decreases.
Yes. So
That's
that's the
why,
correct point, that when the temperature will increase, the bond strength will decrease. And why so? Because atomic vibrations will increase, right?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And then the stiffness of the bond will indeed decrease, because
Yes,
initially, if you are talking of a static lattice approximation, when atoms are rigidly fixed at their equilibrium position, in that case, there is some equilibrium distribution of electrons, and electrons sit in the bond very properly. And when the temperature increase, atomic vibrations increase, the kinetic energy of the atoms increase, and electrons can't sit properly to the into the bond. Electrons act like a glue to the binding of the atoms, right? That's another way of looking at it. Then what happens that if you try to fix any two bodies with the help of a glue, so if you fix them and don't allow them to move, the glue will stick very effectively and the strength will come very good. But it may happen that, okay, the bodies are left in sort of a vibration mode, then the glue won't stick them properly, right? And this glue is not like conventional glue that, okay, I mean, it will dry up and then, okay, agar aap theek se usko, if you don't stick that properly, glue will dry up and bodies won't stick. No, here the electrons are acting like a permanent glue. It doesn't dry up like the conventional case. But yes, the thing is that the two bodies are in some sort of vibration with each other, so that glue won't be that effective. And we can say that, okay, the bonds will be weaker in that case. Weaker are the bonds, weaker will be the restoring force, and stiffness constants are relating to the restoring force itself. So that's one way of conceptually looking at it. Okay. Uh, well, so that is how we can explain this, and then there may be certain other things which you could ask yourself, that why is this very high for tungsten? Why is it really very low for potassium? So what we can deduce from this means relative magnitude ofCijs. What does they convey us? Sandeep, there is a huge noise in your mic. I don't know why. What is
Yes,
going on?
sir.
What is going on in your background? There is a huge noise. I don't know. I mean, that's okay. No problem. It happened from home. But yes, what is how we can interpret the relative magnitude of these stiffness constants? For example, tungsten has highest here, and then I think potassium K has lowest. How we can physically relate them? I mean, what physical interpretation we can make out of these numbers? Yes. Waiting for your answer. Are you able to hear me, or are you getting what I am talking, or I'm just speaking anything like you are not getting it? What physical meaning can we deduce out of their the numbers? These numbers appearing in the table. Bond strength is more in case of tungsten. Yes. Now you can go and try to see the properties of, or rather, mechanical properties of potassium and tungsten. Yeah, and then you would see that tungsten definitely is more stronger than potassium. These are sort of soft metals mechanically. Potassium and all those sodium, even they can be cut with the knife. So that is how we can relate these numbers with the mechanical or physical strength of the body. But I mean, that's okay. I mean, it is related. But then strength has many parameters and many ways of interpretation. So we need to talk about which particular strength we are talking. So these, and indeed these stiffness constants, as the name indicate, stiffness, how stiff is certain material, right? So the name itself carries the meaning, but sometimes we don't note things carefully, and that's why we miss the things. Okay, there is some other now this is something really interesting. This is another table sitting in the Kittle's book. Usually we don't read these tables, and we don't bother to look at these numbers. Our objective is to read the text and understand concept sometimes, and then that's all. But these tables are really interesting. Now this table basically gives the values of stiffness constants at 300 Kelvin for various other, these are also cubic structures. These are metals usually. These are all metals. And here is even insulators are included rather. Now you should see diamond. We assume, we saw that, okay, tungsten is hard. But you know, diamond is harder than anything, right? You can see those signatures here. So 10.76. This is double the value, almost double the value. So you can see from here that diamond is very, very hard. But there is something interesting here, that C12 for tungsten is larger than C12 for diamond. Then what does it mean? So even C44 for diamond is very, very large, in rather almost like 5 times than the this one, what you can call C44 for tungsten. So basically these characteristics relates to the strongly anisotropic nature of the diamond structure. Diamond is held together by covalent bonds, and this is held together by metallic bonds. These are usually the major contribution is here, the metallic bonding. We will be discussing the bonding in the coming lectures now. But yes, this reflects the strong anisotropy in that structure. So if you try to say, for example, pull the diamond along some specific direction, we can be in a better position to pull that apart, or we can say the cleavage axis, you can say. But in certain axes, it is not possible because the strength is very, very large. So that is how we can, by looking at these, we can decide the cleavage axis. What axis can be best axis to cut a particular metal or particular crystal. Anyhow, Now you can see sodium even softer than, I think, potassium. Is it? Yeah. No, sodium is slightly stronger than potassium. It's 0.073. It is 0.0416. So that's how you can relate all these to the. Now try to see the diamond thing, right? It is way higher in magnitude. So that's what lists the physical or interesting aspects of these stiffness constants. So well, this completes our continuum model. I mean, that's all we had to cover from continuum model in our syllabus. Now we shall be moving to the microscopic aspects of crystal bonding. That how we can microscopically understand that various crystals, how do they bind to each other. And for that, we will be actually discussing what are the forces responsible for binding of the crystals. So there are four main broad categories. The crystal bindings is actually divided into four broad categories. And one of them is actually related to the crystals of inert gases. And these crystals are actually bound together by van der Waal interaction. So we shall be talking about this in detail. But these crystals are something really interesting. You know, inert gases are the gases where the atoms have their outermost shell completely filled. So they don't have any tendency to gain or lose the electron. They are in the noble gas configuration. That's what we can say, right? But even those gases form the crystals. If something is forming crystals, that means what? There is some interatomic forces which are trying to bind them together. Now, usually in our earlier classes, we have studied that if we talk of any gas or any liquid, then or any bond formation actually, then any bond formation is associated with the tendency of an atom to complete its octet, isn't it, or outermost shell. That's what is called covalent bond. But in noble gases, that tendency is completely not there. I mean, they have already completely filled outermost shell, so they don't have that tendency. Well, another possibility may be to actually um, the attractive interaction may be because of ionic interaction. That's what we will also be discussing. But in inert gases, ionic interaction is also not there. And what is the fundamental reason behind ionic bonding? Is that, okay, for example, in sodium chloride, one of the atom, sodium, for example, has a single electron in outermost shell. So by losing that electron, it can gain the noble gas configuration. So it has some tendency to lose it and forming sodium plus ion. And in chlorine, it has a tendency to gain one electron, so it can gain that electron, which is left by sodium. And then we have sodium plus kind of ions and chlorine minus kind of ions, and these ions interact with each other via Coulomb interaction, forming the ionic bonds. But that can't happen, even that can't happen in case of inert gases, because there is no point that you can eject out electron easily from the inert gas atom, because they are already in the noble gas configuration. So the ionization energy is very, very high, which is not practically available for during any chemical reaction. So that's also not the case. Other situation may be metallic crystals, where we have a lot of free electrons. For example, in sodium metal, when many sodium atoms come together, so they would like to leave their valence electron, get rid of it, and they leave it freely to roam around in the metal. So that kind of electrons can also act like a binding force or binding glue. So that's another thing, but that is also not the case of inert gas crystals. So they are most interesting. So metallic bonding is also not there. Ionic bonding is also not there. Covalent crystals, for example, diamond. So in covalent crystals, the electrons are shared So metallic bonds are formed by free electrons. They are very free, and the atom doesn't has a specific tendency to hold its electrons together to itself, and they are left free to roam around. But in contrary, in covalent bonding, the atoms share their electron, but they don't let that electron move around freely. And that is the kind of bonding called covalent bonding. For example, in methane, you may see carbon atom sharing its electron with hydrogen, but then the electron of carbon and one electron of hydrogen, both electrons are, carbon doesn't want to get rid of its electron. It don't want to lose the full hold of the electron so that the hydrogen take it completely and go away. Or hydrogen also doesn't allow it. It's a kind of sharing under constraints, I mean conditional sharing. So in that circumstances, the electrons are localized. So that kind of bonding is covalent bonding. So usually you will see that metallic bonding case, as the name indicate, there are free electrons or delocalized electrons. Those crystals are metallic in nature, conducting metals. And in case of covalent bonding, electrons are shared there as well, but these are localized. They are shared in a specific region where the atoms are, the orbitals of the atoms are overlapping. So those crystals are insulators usually, or semiconductors. So we will be discussing all these four kinds of bondings, and then how we can understand the properties from those bonding perspective, bonding forces perspective. And first and most interesting of them are crystals of inert gas. Now, as I already told you, that there is no tendency of inert gas atoms to actually form bonds. I mean, they can't form bonds within ionic interaction or covalent manner or ionic manner. So, just a minute, sorry. Okay, so now the question is, what causes, oh, I'm not audible. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Shreya is saying I'm not audible. I don't know. Am I audible to others as well?
Yes, sir.
Shreya, now is it okay with you? Okay, fine. Fine. Well, so these inert gas crystals, just a minute. I think I had to get an important call. Just a minute. Give me 1 minute, please. Please hold on 1 minute. I'm sorry for this. All right. Sorry for the interruption. Well, so I mean, what we were discussing is that there is no such tendency. I mean, they don't share their electrons. They don't lose their electron completely. So the question is, what holds them together? And other interesting things are that the inert gas crystals are simplest, means the electron distribution is very close to that of free atoms. The electrons in inert gas atoms almost kind of follow a spherical distribution. Then the question is, and these are some of the properties, that these are the crystals which are transparent insulators. They are insulating, no conduction. Transparent means optically there is no absorption, and very weakly bound. Obviously, bonds are not going to be very strong because they are neither covalent bonds. They are not what you can call ionic bond. They are not metallic bonds. So they are weakly bound, and the melting points are very, very low. So all these things actually indicates to the situation that the crystals of inert gases must be very weakly bound crystals. Means the bonding is not going to be very, very strong, must not be very, very strong. So and they are closely packed structures. I mean, they follow either FCC or HCP structure. And then the question comes, what holds the inert gas crystals together? Then you will say, okay, it's a van der Waals interaction, as I shared in the previous slide. But the question is, what is the mechanism, or what is the origin behind the van der Waals interaction? What is the origin or mechanism, physical mechanism behind van der Waals interaction? Any one of you, please? Yes. What do you think? What is the physical reason? Yes, please.
Cohesive energy, sir.
Cohesive energy comes from some physical interaction. Cohesive energy is there with everything. I mean, ionic crystals also have cohesive energy. Metallic crystals also have cohesive energy. Means there is some attractive interaction, and attractive interaction leads to a cohesive energy. That's fine.
Yes.
What causes that cohesive energy to happen, or what causes that attractive interaction? Because I mean, see, if you go in terms of fundamental interactions, and we have 4 fundamental interactions, right? With gravitational force, weak forces, strong forces, right? All those 4 forces are there, electromagnetic forces. So now the question to ask is, what holds these together? There doesn't seem to be Coulomb interaction because they are not
Dipole.
ionic.
Sir,
Huh?
dipole moment of that.
They are relating to the dipole moment. Okay, how does dipole moment leads to the attractive interaction now? That's what we want to discuss. And what causes those dipole moments to get formed? Because we are saying those inert gas atoms indeed
Yes,
are spherically symmetric, right?
Yes.
And there is a nucleus centrally located, and the electron distribution is symmetric around that nucleus. So there can't be a dipole in that case. In that case, right? There can't be a dipole formation because center of charge for positive and negative in case of symmetric charge distribution is going to be exactly the same. Whereas for dipole formation, there should be separation of the charges, isn't it? 2 charges should be separated. So, well, I mean, these are kind of questions which you may face in any interview, or even you should face them within your mind, that what causes these things to happen. So this is something really very important. And if you see that the electron distribution in the crystal is not significantly distorted from the electron distribution around the free atom, because not much energy is available to distort the free atom charge distributions. I already told you that. The cohesive energy of the atom in the crystal is only 1% or less even that of the ionization energy of atomic electrons. So if you compare the cohesive energies of the what you call inert gas crystals, these energies are very, very less in comparison to the ionization energies or electronic energies. So this means that the bonding is weak, obviously, and that is not coming from the ionization. But yes, what is this energy doing, this very small energy? This small energy actually is acting as a mechanism to distort the electron distribution around the nucleus. So exactly symmetric distribution is not really symmetric in that way. And as Sandeep pointed out, it is actually the dipole-dipole interaction. So how that happens? Okay, let us first look at this table where the things will be more clear to us. This is summarizing the parameters of inert gas crystals. So helium is liquid. We don't, I mean, there is no, what you call, report where helium is solidified at 0 pressure. So these are this all data is for 0 pressure. So main thing is related to neon. I mean, see neon, argon, krypton, xenon, all these form crystals, and in the crystalline form, the interatomic distance is 3.13, 3.7. So this increases as we go down. So this is very much expected because size of atom is increasing while we go downwards. So that's what is very clearly visible here. Cohesive energies, now you notice the cohesive energies. Cohesive energies are of this order: 0.02, 0.08, 116, 0.17 electron volt per atom. You will notice that cohesive energies are increasing down the group, we should say. And smaller is the atom, smaller is the cohesive energy. Bigger is the atom, bigger is the cohesive energy. Now our objective is to explain all these trends. How our model, or whatever we are going to now study, how that can be used to explain these trends. How we can explain this? Why is it happening this way? Melting points also, if you notice, this is smallest for this one, higher, and highest for xenon. Okay, now you see ionization energies are very, very high. Now you can notice for neon it is 21.56, and try to notice the cohesive energy. It is very, very less in comparison to this one, right? Something like 1% or so. You can get the percentages yourself. So now the question is that what causes this trend? If we try to ask ourselves, so I mean, whatever mathematics we do, complex mathematics we do, behind that mathematics is a physical intuition, our imagination, that okay, how we can develop a model and what might be happening. First we try to imagine things qualitatively, that okay, what might be happening physically. Then we go to the quantitative model where we try to develop the mathematics for this. So we should first pay attention on these numbers and then try to see, okay, what is the physical meaning of these numbers? First, let us try to pay attention to this. Cohesive energy relates to the bond strength, right? Stronger is the bonds, means more strongly are the atoms bound, and more is going to be the cohesive energy. Same is the case of melting point. So basically, more strongly are the atoms bound, higher will be the temperature at which the solid will melt down to liquid, and lesser is the bond strength, lower will be the temperature at which they will melt. So basically in melting, what is happening, if we take a sort of rough idea or a crucial, I mean very crude kind of intuitive imagination, then what we can see is that okay, melting can be seen to be something like the attractive interaction or coming from the potential energy. That is, if the solid is in or if any substance is in solid form, means potential energy is stronger than the kinetic energy of the atoms, and it is the potential energy which holds them together. So potential energy is dominant. When we increase the temperature, kinetic energy starts to increase, and when kinetic energy starts to increase, the potential energy, suppose it starts to decrease. Why it starts to decrease? We saw in the previous table that as the temperature will increase, the bond strength will decrease. So the potential energy starts decreasing, kinetic energy starts increasing. With increase in temperature, what will happen? A situation will come when kinetic energy is very, very dominant in comparison to the potential energy, and that is the situation when we can expect substance to melt, right? So lower is the melting point, means lower is the potential energy or interaction energy. Now we can see that down the group, the interaction energy is increasing, means bond strength is increasing, because this is being reflected in cohesive energy data as well as in melting point data. So now we should try to think of this, that why is it this leading to stronger bond strength in case of xenon and smallest bond strength in case of neon. So if we see that we can see, or we know it, that xenon is largest atom, right, among these. So if it is largest among these, then if you consider this to be like a charge distribution, right? There is a nucleus, there is a charge distribution around it, negative electron charge distribution around positive nucleus. Then we can now suppose you have a big sphere, bigger size sphere, and a small size sphere. So it is usually easy or convenient to distort bigger atom than the smaller atom, because in case of bigger atom, the outermost electrons are far away from the nucleus and they are less strongly bound. They are less strongly bound. This is what I mean, or I would say they are weakly bound. We can say it that way. In case of neon, the outermost electrons are not very far from the nucleus, quite close to it, near to it rather, and hence they are strongly bound. So if we consider dipole formation, then it must be convenient in case of xenon than in case of neon. So dipole formation is like, okay, you have a positive charge, which is nucleus. You have negatively charged cloud of electrons. In a undistorted atom, the center of charges for positive and negative both are at same point, and hence there is no net dipole moment. Now suppose because of certain distortion which may arise because of the atoms coming close to each other, or some temperature thermal effects, when many atoms will come close to each other to form bond, or they are not forming bond but they are brought together to each other when by lowering, say suppose temperature or increasing pressure to some extent, then what will happen? The electron clouds of the external electrons will try to repel each other, right? So what will happen because of that? What may happen because of that is that those uh, electrons will somehow get distorted somewhat in reference to their initial configuration. And what will that do? That may give rise to development of some dipole moment. And that dipole moment is not permanent. These dipoles are not permanently developed. So these are dynamically, these keeps on changing. Sometimes there is a dipole moment, then atoms comes back to its original position. So these are electrodynamic interaction, not electrostatic. Because it would have, if it would have been a permanent dipole, then we should have considered simple Coulomb interaction and things would have been done that way. But it is actually not exactly that way. But yes, that is how we can consider the dipoles to get formed. So this is what I think I already talked. I mean, electrostatic potential of spherical distribution, electronic charge is cancelled and outside a neutral atom by electrostatic potential. I mean, that's all the story I told you. So basically, and this is what is the important part here, that atoms induce the dipole moments in each other. So why they may induce? It is not even high pressure. If you even refer to the kinetic theory of gases, if the gases are at ambient pressure also, atoms are randomly moving, they must be colliding with each other. So at the time of collision, the valence electrons or outermost electron clouds do interact with each other, which may lead to formation of the dipoles. So these are various intuitive ways of considering the physical origin behind the formation of the dipoles. In books, it is written, okay, there is a dipole formation, but how can you intuitively explain this? So you can try to see it that way. Now, having accepted this, we assume that, okay, there is some dipole formation in the atoms of, so dipole formation will be easier in xenon, but and hardest for neon. That is why the bond strength is highest for xenon, which is reflected in this data, and smallest in neon. Okay. So, well, now we will be developing a quantitative model for understanding these what you call inert gas crystals, since time is already running out. So we will be doing this tomorrow, and tomorrow we will be applying that the model of dipole-dipole interaction, and then we'll derive an expression for attractive interaction, which is a part of van der Waals forces. That how attractive interaction comes into picture, and then how much attractive interaction will be there. All that we will be doing in the next class. I mean tomorrow's class. Well, okay, you have not signed your attendance, so do sign your attendance quickly. And along with that, if there is any question, I would request you to ask your question meanwhile. If there is any question, yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Sandeep.
Sir, as you said, cohesive energy is related to bond strength. That is, bond strength increases, then cohesive energy also increases.
Yeah, sure.
But why ionization energy is less in xenon as compared to neon?
Why ionization energy is? Because there
Less.
we are ejecting the electron totally. And xenon is larger in size, though extra outer electron will be easy to knock out. Their electron is completely ejected. But in case
Okay.
of underwall interaction, we are not ejecting the electrons. We are just distorting the charge distribution around the atom. So
Okay.
distorting as well as ejection is of course easy for xenon, but in inert gas crystals, the ejection we don't reach up to ejecting the electron. We only distort it, and more is the distortion, more will be the dipole moment, higher will be the bond strength. That's how you can relate it,
Yes. Sir.
isn't it? Is it clear
Yes.
or not? I mean,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
okay, okay, fine. Any other question? Well,
Sir,
if there is, yeah, please, Sandeep.
sir, one more question. Sir,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
general question. What is
Huh?
the difference between? It's a general question, sir. What is the
Mhm.
difference between density of stand and sometimes we use local density of states, density of states
Um,
and local density of states?
okay, I mean, I would rather pass this question to the next class because this is not directly related to this. But yes,
Yes, sir.
I will discuss it when we will be discussing free electron theory. If you are interested in, I mean, you are in hurry, then we can discuss it off the class. I mean, you can call me or we can discuss it other way. So no problem. You can even WhatsApp me. Okay, that's not part of this, so let's not discuss it here as such. It will be coming
Okay.
up in the next classes, so we will be doing it there.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Sandeep. Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you very much. We'll meet tomorrow in the next class.